Hello, that last episode I did ended up being a bit of a long one, so I do apologise for that, as I know many of you enjoy the sort of like 10-minute format that I try to adhere to, that I try to stick to as best as possible. But when I do go over on an episode, it's usually a sign to me that I have more that I want to share with you, more that I want to talk about. So I'm going to continue talking about languages today. And specifically, I'd like to talk about loving your own language, which is something I introduced the idea of last time. So last time I said I thought it was very good if you could love your own language, which at the same time I think is probably a bit hard for many of us to do. Well, I don't know about many of you, because to be fair, you're all learning in English. I imagine you are. Actually, there are some people who've written to me and told me that they listen to podcasts and they're native English speakers anyway, which was a bit unusual. I didn't expect that. But anyway, most of you are learning another language. And by doing so, you gain some, like an unusual insight or perspective for your own language that people who only speak your own language don't necessarily don't necessarily have. Now, I should imagine that, I'm going to guess, but I'm going to imagine that most of you listening to this podcast are living in countries where the idea of speaking another language isn't really that weird. I've got, I was brought up in England, and I've got an English way of looking at things, and let me tell you, let's just say we're atrocious at speaking foreign languages in England, I would say. People who were born in Britain and don't necessarily have parents who speak another language, only been speaking English their whole lives, and just go to school and go through the school education system and learn a bit of a language there. We're really terrible at learning other languages, and I think there are very. I think I'd love to know what the actual percentage of people in England who can speak a foreign language are, who don't have ties, who don't have to other countries, like they don't have parents who speak another language anyway. I'd love to know what the percentage is, because it's got to be really low. The number of people who speak a language with like any degree of fluency, it's got to be. I wouldn't be surprised if it was less than 1%. It really is that bad. And that is an unfortunate side effect of English sort of being like the lingua franca, the common language that people seem to use to communicate with each other from various different countries. Actually, where on earth does the word lingua franca come from? That does not sound English to me, and I've just used it without really thinking about it. Okay, I've just had to look that up, and it is apparently French. So I'm sure my pronunciation of that was atrocious. But that's a word, or a couple of words, that we do use fairly commonly in English. So there you go. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is learning another language perhaps gives you like a greater level of insight into your own language, perhaps a greater level of appreciation as to, good parts about your language, how your ways in which your language works that you like. So perhaps it's perhaps it can introduce a love of your own language to you, which I personally think is great. I'm not sure if learning Japanese has done that to me. I do love the English language, but I believe I have done so before even trying to learn any other language. And I think I've largely got my father to thank for that, because he was always, I don't know why he did this, but he did. He would always correct me and my siblings, me and my sisters, if we were to use any, incorrect grammar, or sometimes, not so much slang, but yeah, usually just grammar, or perhaps mispronounce a word, or what else? Or misuse a word, like the wrong word in the... No. Yes, the wrong word in the wrong situation. So I think thanks to him, I've always sort of been when I've been listening to other people speak, I've been conscious of how they speak. I've picked up on errors that they make when they're speaking, grammatical errors or just misusing words or whatever it is. And I think that's made me a bit conscious about how I speak, and I don't know, sort of like instilled the desire to try and speak to the best of my abilities, to try and use English to the best of my abilities. I will say that I don't really feel like I've achieved that. I think I could have put a lot more effort into it. I don't know, maybe with speaking more clearly, perhaps, maybe expanding my vocabulary. I could have really lent into it and spent a lot of time learning more about English, which I haven't. So I could have, I could have done a lot better, and there's certainly still a lot more room to grow, is what I'm trying to say. But putting that to one side, I do have this love of English, and I do sort of feel like I try to be careful when I'm using it. Like I try to improve when I can. I try to correct mistakes. What's a recent mistake? Oh yes, here's a recent mistake I've been making for a long time that I've only corrected in the last, I don't know, few years or something. The word privacy. For pretty much all of my life, I've been pronouncing that word as privacy, which is how people from the US say it, and probably some other English-speaking countries as well, perhaps Australia and so on and so on. But to be fair to me, the only reason I've been making this mistake is because everyone else around me has been making this mistake. And another good example, which I've managed to correct, and this would go back, I don't know how long ago, maybe 5 years, I managed to correct this mistake. Schedule. So many people around, almost everyone around me in England. Well, okay, I'm not in England anymore, but when I was, almost everyone was saying schedule, which is, again, the US way to say it. And I've no doubt that all of these things are changing, like the ways, the words that we use, the ways that we pronounce those words, because of media and certainly the internet and social networking sites, and just a larger exposure to US English. It's definitely changing the way British English is spoken these days, both in terms of pronunciation, intonation, the tone that we use in our language, and what else? The choice of words, the spelling of words sometimes, the alternative US spelling of the word through. I should imagine that must be in English dictionaries now. The THRU that you might see in a drive through. I'm not sure about the US alternative spelling of night. So I don't know if you know, but you can spell... I'm no expert on US English here, but I just know that I've seen examples in US English where it's spelt NITE instead of NIGHT. I don't know what the rules are for that in US English, but I will say that NITE does not exist in British English, and I don't think it should exist in British English. I think words are hard enough to spell as they are when we've just got one version of them. What I don't want is like duplicate versions of many, many words, and then you learn like, you can spell it this way or you can spell it that way. That reminds me a bit of Japanese, where you've got this one character and it can be read like 5 different ways or something like that, 5 different readings, and depending on which word it's in, it's got a different pronunciation. That's going down to sort of like Japanese levels of complexity. So let's not have that in the English language. It's already hard enough just trying to spell some of the words that we have that are ridiculous. Even I get caught out forgetting how to spell things. The other day I was trying to write the word algorithm, and for some reason I was thinking of the word rhythm, because it's right there. The sound, rhythm, is right there in algorithm, and I was thinking, it doesn't have a Y in it, does it, algorithm? And no, of course it doesn't. But there you go, that's just one of the crazy examples of English. I'm sure you know many more of them than I do. But anyway, I guess what I was trying to say is, I think it's not only good to sort of love your own language, but important to love your own language so that you look after it. Because languages are living things. They don't remain static. I mean, yes, we've written down the rules and the grammar, and we've got dictionaries that describe all the words, but those dictionaries are constantly updated and changed and edited, and I should imagine the same thing happens for books that explain grammar, English grammar. They must be updated as well, because the language is living and evolving, and if everyone starts to use incorrect grammar and it becomes common enough, then the books are going to have to be updated to reflect this. And maybe you think that's a bit extreme, like, no, that wouldn't happen. The rules are the rules, and they'll stay the same forever. That is certainly not the case. I mean, if you look at the way that people used to speak in England, probably even as far back as 100 years ago, if you read an old book, you'll notice the language is a bit different, or perhaps some of the grammar's a bit different, and you go further back still and it just keeps changing and changing again. And I imagine it would change a lot more rapidly years ago, because we didn't necessarily write it down as thoroughly. It wasn't as easy to catalog it all, to describe it all, to write down all the rules of it. And now it is, and people have more access, to these rules, these grammar rules, so they can just go on the internet and look what the correct way to say something is. But having said that, I still think there's an awful lot of people, especially in a country like England, who use their language but have no love for it. It's just a tool. It's just something that they learnt almost naturally and effortlessly. They probably forget how hard it used to be to speak, or to read, or to write. So there's no real celebration of, yes, I've done it, yes, I've learnt English, or I don't know, like a desire to improve. It's like I can use English, why would I bother learning anything more about it? And I do think that's a shame, because I do think that we need to take care of our languages, or they might end up changing, a bit too much, to the point where they become sort of like a bit of a dumbed down version of the original thing. Which, I don't know, I'm in two minds about that. On the one hand, a simplification of English would be great for people learning it. On the other hand, it's sort of also, for me, would seem a lot less beautiful. The books I tend to enjoy the most are the ones where the story is not only good, but the usage of English is also good. I'm reading it and I'm like, wow, that's a nice way to say that. Or, I wish I could speak like that. I wish I could write like that. I'm impressed by it. So if we dumb everything down, I don't know. Good points and bad points, I suppose. But I certainly hope it doesn't end up going that way. I do hope we can sort of look after our languages, because they have taken absolutely thousands of years to get to the point that they are. It's been a very, very long evolution, and I suppose I wonder how quickly they could be changed. Sometimes radically, sometimes governments impose certain changes to languages that just changes them overnight. But anyway, I do think there's something we, perhaps all of us can do just by learning to love our own languages, if we don't already. Okay, that is it for today's episode. I do hope you've enjoyed listening to it. I thought it was a pretty interesting topic. Anyway, I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Until then, bye-bye.